The missile launch is a distraction, a high-cost, kinetically loud advertisement for a war no solvent power wants to fight. The media shows you explosions because they are simple, visual, and wrong. The strategic calculus has shifted. The real vector of attack is not kinetic, it is asymmetric silence. Analysts at RUSI and CSIS have mapped the two kill switches for the global system, the seafloor and low Earth orbit. The targets are not cities. They are the fiber optic cables that carry 99% of all data, including trillions in daily financial transactions. This is not a theory. It is a documented escalation protocol for a power facing a solvency crisis. The second vector is satellite blinding, rendering GPS, communication, and intelligence assets inert without firing a single missile. The objective is to create a blind Leviathan, a superpower with immense kinetic force, but stripped of its senses. A state with launch-on-warning protocols that can no longer see the launch. This is the mathematical consequence of decline. Between 2000 and 2020, the European Union's share of global industrial output collapsed from 20.8% to 14.3%. A desperate actor, hemorrhaging economic power, does not seek a fair fight. It seeks a systemic reset button. The playbook shifts from kinetic engagement to asymmetric leverage, like threatening to sell U.S. debt, as was reported by El País. The next step is a physical disconnection. While legacy media reports on Ethiopia's acquisition of Russian Orion E drones, the real strategic assets are being deployed in total silence. A desperate power will not challenge your military. It will sever your connection to the global economic system. It will make you a liability to yourself. That is the silent vector. The invasion was not a launch on strength. It was a launch on insolvency. CSIS analysis confirms the kinetic action was initiated to preempt a terminal domestic solvency crisis. The war itself had become a domestic liability, a vector for internal collapse. When a state's economic model fails, it cannot afford conventional competition. It is forced to pivot. This is a mathematical blueprint, not a unique event. Between 2000 and 2020, the European Union saw its global industrial output share collapse from 20.8% to 14.3%. The response was not innovation, but legislation, a pivot to protectionism with its Industrial Accelerator Act. Economic weakness forces a defensive, asymmetric reaction. Russia's solvency crisis was more acute. Its pivot was therefore more kinetic. Unable to compete economically, Moscow was forced to leverage its remaining asymmetric asset, military force. The objective was to fracture the global system and create a new reality where its weakness was no longer a terminal liability. The proof of this financial desperation is in the asset liquidation. A solvent power preparing for a protracted war would hoard its most advanced systems. Instead, Russia is exporting its premier Orion E strike drones to clients like Ethiopia. This is not a demonstration of industrial capacity. It is a fire sale to generate immediate liquidity. The kinetic cost of the war requires selling the very tools needed to win it. The war is not the cause of Russia's weakness. It is the most visible symptom of it. A desperate actor facing mathematical insolvency chose to make its structural weakness a systemic liability for the entire world. This is the protocol for escalation. Weakness is the ultimate accelerant. The core of the escalation blueprint is a solvency crisis expressed kinetically. Reports from strategic bodies like RUSI, Royal United Services Institute, detail the mathematical breakdown. A modern main battle tank represents a capital investment of approximately $5 million. The weapon neutralizing it, a commercially modified FPV drone, costs $500. This is not a balanced equation, it is a systemic vulnerability. This 10,000 to 1 cost disparity is the engine of the democratization of violence. Lethality, once the exclusive domain of solvent superpowers, has collapsed in price. Its access has been distributed to any actor with a grievance and a credit card. The acquisition of advanced strike drones by nations like Ethiopia is not an anomaly. It is the new baseline. For a declining power whose industrial base has been hollowed out, the choice is not whether to build the $5 million asset. The choice is how many thousands of the $500 vectors it can deploy to liquidate the assets of its solvent rivals. This is the pure economics of lethality. Weakness is leveraged into an asymmetric weapon, turning the global order into a launch-on-warning environment. The gray zone is not a geographical location. It is a strategic protocol. It is a designated battle space where declining powers can test asymmetric weapons, kinetic and financial, without triggering a direct full-spectrum response. Regional instability, from the Horn of Africa to internal warnings in nations like Canada or South Africa, is not the cause of systemic risk. These are the laboratories. They are deliberately selected staging grounds to stress test the global system itself. The evidence is documented. Ethiopia recently confirmed its acquisition of Russian Orion E strike drones. According to official reports, this is the first verified export of the Orion drone system. This is not a simple arms sale. This is a kinetic trial. A major power is using a regional conflict as a live-fire showroom and data collection exercise, gauging the West's response protocols and the system's kinetic cost. This proliferation is a symptom of a deeper solvency crisis. The cause is mathematical. Between 2000 and 2020, the European Union's share of global industrial output collapsed from 20.8% to 14.3%. That 6.5% deficit is a measure of lost power. The response is not innovation. It is desperation, codified in documents like the EU's Industrial Accelerator Act, a protectionist pivot away from global competition. When an established power loses economic leverage, it is forced to weaponize its remaining assets. We now have analysis, cited in publications like El País, that European strategists are gaming out the sale of U.S. debt as an asymmetric weapon against the United States. This is the financial equivalent of a kinetic first strike. It transforms an ally into a systemic liability. The blueprint is now operational. Economic decline forces a search for asymmetric leverage. This leverage is tested in proxy laboratories like Ethiopia and wargamed in financial centers like Brussels. The next 12 months will see an acceleration of this protocol. Expect more first-ever deployments of advanced hardware into regional conflicts and more open threats of financial warfare between allies. This is not a theory of escalation. It is the mathematical consequence of decline. The central flaw in mutually assured destruction is the assumption of perfect information. In the fog of digital war, this assumption is inverted. A cyber attack does not need to detonate a warhead. It only needs to blind the early warning radar. When the screens go black, the commander is not left with a choice. They are left with a protocol. This is the launch-on-warning doctrine. CSIS analysis confirms this is a standing protocol for nuclear-armed states. A retaliatory strike is launched upon detection of an incoming attack before the incoming warheads can eliminate the capacity to respond. It is a system designed to guarantee a second strike by compressing the decision timeline to minutes. A digital vector that severs the data feed from spy satellites and ground-based radar creates an impossible paradox. The absence of information becomes itself the warning. The protocol forces the commander to assume the worst-case scenario, that the blackout is masking an imminent decapitation strike. Hesitation is not an option. It is a violation of the entire deterrence framework. Fear is irrelevant. The launch is a mathematical consequence of a data vacuum. This is the blueprint for systemic escalation, a power facing an economic solvency crisis, witnessing its global industrial share plummet from 20.8% to 14.3%, is incentivized to leverage asymmetric weapons. But the ultimate asymmetric tool isn't a drone sold to Ethiopia or the threat of selling foreign debt. It is the exploitation of an adversary's own rigid defense posture. The attacker doesn't bear the kinetic cost. They simply create the digital trigger, weaponizing the defender's own protocols against them and turning a regional power's weakness into a global liability. The European Union's share of global industrial output has collapsed from 20.8% to 14.3%. This is not a market fluctuation. It is a solvency crisis. The Industrial Accelerator Act is the document confirming this terminal decline, a pivot to protectionism born from systemic weakness. According to the thesis, this is the precondition for escalation. When an established power loses economic viability, it is forced to reevaluate its liabilities, including its allies. The weaponization of this decline is already priced in. Brussels now openly discusses leveraging its holdings of U.S. debt as an asymmetric tool. This is the blueprint. A desperate actor's weakness becoming a systemic liability. However, a financial threat of this magnitude requires a kinetic demonstration to establish credibility. Analysts at CSS warn that a declining power must signal its willingness to absorb and inflict kinetic cost before initiating a full-spectrum economic attack. The calibration forecast. Within the next 12 months, expect a significant, attribution impossible disruption targeting a critical subsea data cable landing station. Marseille or Lisbon are the primary vectors. The event, a cut cable, a disabled power station, will be officially blamed on seismic activity or a dropped ship anchor. It is a kinetic calibration shot, a non-lethal signal to demonstrate the capacity for asymmetric disruption before the financial trigger is pulled. It is the mathematical certainty of a system under terminal stress,